Joining me on this episode of the Neil Wilkins podcast is the founder of Satori at satorinet.io. Now, this is something that is going to be fascinating for you. If you are into AI, if you're into blockchain, if those things are putting fear into you right now and you think, I know I need to get on board with this stuff, but I really don't know where to begin. And actually, what does the future hold? And it is that big question, what does the future hold? That is the kind of thing that fuels my guest here on the podcast today, and that is Mr. Jordan Miller. Welcome, Jordan.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Now, Satori, we have to start with the how did you begin to found and come up with the concept of Satori? Because when we explain this to the listeners, they're going to be blown away by actually what this is already starting to build. And it's a journey for sure, what you're going to be explaining to us. But where did this all begin?
I got really interested in the brain and how the brain works. I wanted to know how intelligence works as such. And I thought, well, okay, so there's a theoretical best way to aggregate data and understand it. And the best system or computer that can do that right now is a human brain. And so I wanted to know, what are the operating principles of the human brain? That's kind of what got me started on this whole path. One of those is future prediction, temporal prediction. That's one of I see as the main difference between what we're doing in AI now and the insight that Satori can give.
Wow. I mean, if that doesn't set the bar super, super high, and this expectation that we have blockchain, we have this kind of dispersed intelligence, if you could call it that. We have AI, which is coming at us in all shapes, forms, and guises, and from loads of different directions. And I think for a lot of us now, we're realizing it is more than just purely ChatGPT. There is this whole capability out there to do things that we could only dream of maybe even 5-10 years ago, and it's the scale of this thing, isn't it? How are you finding with Satori this kind of idea that a crypto AI can predict the future? How are you finding this concept of scale? Because that must actually hurt in terms of the mind power that a human can put into this when you actually think of how big and how powerful this could get.
Well, before I even found out about crypto and blockchain technology, I thought I wanted to build a network of computers that could watch all of our civilization, all of our society, all of our environment, basically just watch the numbers, watch the metrics, and see how everything works. And the main, if you can predict something, if you can foresee it, before it happens, then you must understand something, right, about that thing. You must kind of get it. So future prediction is kind of like a really good metric to know if you're making a good model. And it's kind of the only metric that our brains have, at least on the fundamental levels, to know if they're understanding the world that they're trying to make sense of. And so once I discovered blockchain, though, I realized blockchain can give us the infrastructure to build out this network that can, tie all these computers together so they can communicate. I guess that's kind of how it got incepted into the blockchain plus AI rather than just some kind of AI network. I think the blockchain is an important part.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I think a lot of us who aren't deeply immersed in blockchain kind of have this. I mean, I guess this view that it's all about cryptocurrency. It's all about a new form of banking and monetization and trade. But actually, it's far, far deeper and more kind of nuanced than that, isn't it? Really, could you give the listeners just a little sense from your perspective? Really where kind of blockchain sits in this kind of this network of, let's call it intelligence, because I think what you're building here is an intelligent future, if you like, in terms of a network. Just describe for us a little bit about your take on blockchain and really how that works.
Well, it allows us to build a network that's there's no one central point of failure, and there's no one central authority that you have to, you know. So it allows us to build a network that anybody can come and provide value and participate in the network without having to, get permission or anything like that. So that's kind of what the blockchain provides. But it also, like you mentioned, it can create tokens, currencies, or whatever else. And so that token that it can generate can serve as a unit of control. So with Satori, I think it's important that we decentralize AI as much as possible. And I kind of break that up into three parts. We want to decentralize the production of AI. That gives everybody the ability to produce it on any machine in any way they want. We want to decentralize the benefit of AI, and we can do that with a token. So that when their computer is providing value, they are getting value back in the form of a token. But I think most importantly, we want to decentralize the control of the AI. And that's what this token can be. It can be a unit of control. So with that token, anybody who holds it can then vote on how the AI should work in the future, how it should be trained, all that kind of stuff. They can vote on it, and that gives the control. We can basically disseminate that, kind of democratize it, so that it's not in the hands of some Google or some OpenAI or some entity like that.
Yeah, I was just about to say that kind of almost takes Google and OpenAI. I mean, I'm not wishing, bad on them, but it kind of takes them almost out of the equation, or at least it puts them in a position of, well, it is choice, isn't it? You could go down this non-democratized route and say, okay, I trust OpenAI, just because it is open source, therefore there is some kind of sort of self-policing kind of going on in there, but only to a certain point. Whereas with Google, you have a corporate entity that clearly has, they're a corporate entity with shareholders, so they have their own kind of remit, I guess, in terms of what they're looking to provide. And for some people, many of us, that is absolutely fine. But what you're producing here, though, John, is this kind of much more community driven. It's much more collaborative. It feels just intrinsically safer. Is that kind of how you're seeing it?
I think so. And I think it's important to get this piece of AI, future prediction, decentralized as much as possible, as early as possible. Nobody else seems to be doing that yet in any kind of capacity, including centralized. So if we can decentralize that, I think it's important, because, it would have been nice to kind of birth language in a decentralized manner, but we didn't. So that's okay. We're all right. But when you do something like future prediction, you can, if you get good at it, you can start to, people believe that you're good at it. And then they behave as if whatever you say is going to be true. And so if you get good enough, you can issue self-fulfilling prophecies. So if that aspect of intelligence or AI is developed in a centralized manner, I think that's a problem. We don't want self-fulfilling prophecies. We don't want that kind of power centralized. So I think this application of intelligence in particular is something that needs to be decentralized as much as we can.
There's a kind of a safety aspect in here as much as a kind of a moral kind of aspect, isn't there? Because it feels that if it is, as you say, decentralized, there is no one point of control over this, then by its just definition, by its nature, it becomes self-policing. It becomes something that, if I go in and use this model, or somebody else goes in and uses this model, we might get a slightly subtly, depending on how we obviously prompt engineer the interaction, we might get a subtly different result. but it is at the same kind of level. This, in theory, then is going to do good, isn't it? And I know one of the principles of you kind of founding Satori is about doing good. This is all about doing the very, very best with AI. And that just feels, from just a human perspective, the absolute right way to begin to approach this. Is it the doing good that's the real motivator behind it? I'm keen to get kind of, Jordan's take on why this is so important.
Well, I think there's a few reasons. Okay, so decentralizing AI is one reason in and of itself. Um, I think there's another one though. If we're able to make a future oracle, I've talked to people. Some people think, oh, they're afraid of that, or they think it'll turn into Skynet, or whatever. I think it's a very good thing to be able to predict the future on a global scale, or if we can predict major aspects of our society's future, then we can anticipate the future before it happens, and we can make a better world than we could have made otherwise. So if we had a future oracle before, say, the housing crisis, a future oracle that was watching laws being passed and could correlate that with economic behavior and could see it 5 years before it happened. And basically, it just means, it was happening 5 years before it happened. But if it could have seen that it was happening, if it could have detected that, then it could have told us, and we would have changed things so that it never kind of blew up. It never happened in the first place. So that's the kind of major overarching good that I can see coming. But that's quite a ways out. The network has to mature to get to that level. But as we, because that's major black swan events, right? But as we're getting there, we'll be able to find smaller things. So the path is still laden with value, and yeah, I think it is. I think it is an overall good thing to do.
You started with the whole idea that your fascination with kind of human, basically being human, human
Yeah,
cognition, human processing, human kind of mindset, all of those things that make us human, very different currently from what we might define as artificial intelligence. Although I think we'll come on to kind of where that might be ending in the future, maybe in a moment. But kind of beginning with that sort of that human thing, it is great when if you're Neil and you're Jordan and you're very authentic, you're honest, you're open, and you want to see a better world. But the prediction of the future, if this thing becomes the oracle, if this thing becomes all seeing, all predicting, this incredible omnipresent crystal ball that you can look into, and you can, at a very micro level, you can predict stuff that's going to happen around you. At a macro level, you can see, as you say, these big societal things going on. We're not all as authentic and as open and as honest as Jordan and Neil. So what happens then if somebody thinks, okay, this is interesting. Now I'm going to start to think about how I can use this, maybe for manipulation, maybe for coercion. Where does, in the wrong hands, this feels high risk.
yeah, yeah. And so that's why we need to put it in the right hands. The right hands are just everybody's hands. There's no angels. Everybody's a little bit greedy. So I feel like we just need to disseminate it as much as possible. Um, I really do. Now, I think people, what we do with modern day governments as much as we can is we have checks and balances, and so we say, these people have these incentives and they're greedy, and these people want this kind of power and this is how they're trying to get it, and we kind of play them off each other. And I think Satori, we can do the same thing. Um, because people want different things and they'll want to manipulate it in contrasting ways. And so, as long as we have the most number of people trying to get a hold of this, then it stays somewhat decentralized forever. So I think that's ideal.
How do we figure things like, and you kind of touched on it just a moment ago, how does things like, obviously you talk about politics there. How does that kind of come into play? Different politics. How do different cultures? You mentioned languages. How does this stuff kind of come into play here? Are we potentially just going to be seeing with Satori? Do you think, again, you future kind of predicting here what the future of Satori is going to be, but do you think it is going to be that we're just going to see more of the same at scale that will actually amplify the differences between us? Or do you feel that from a human societal perspective, actually what it'll prove in the longer term is that actually we are all the same, we are all one? Which way do you see that going?
I think it'll unify us, particularly kind of like what I said earlier with when you can see the future, then you stop bickering about what it might be and you get to work fixing it, right? Like let's make it better. So, but if you can't all see the future, or if you're seeing different futures because everybody only sees a very small portion, then we never act as one. It takes a long time if we're always arguing. So we have to, that one way for us to come into consensus is to say, okay, this is very clear what's going to happen, and why it's going to happen. And we have a future oracle that can help us make, suss that out and make it very clear for us. So I think that unifies us. Without that, this is one of the things that the brain does. It predicts the future, even on the lowest levels, of like little neurons. And the reason that it has this future prediction in its intelligence algorithm, and it's just ubiquitous, is because it's helpful to all the other parts of the brain if one part is predicting the future. So if the part of my brain that maybe gets audio information from my ears is predicting the future of what I'm going to hear, that also helps all the other parts of the brain, maybe the visual cortex or my executive functions, and vice versa. So it kind of has a network effect if everything is predicting the future of whatever it's looking at. And this is the main. It brings, I think it helps bring our brain into coherence, because we are made up of 100 billion neurons or whatever it is, and those neurons are clumped together in cortical columns, and we've got lots of those, and it's essentially another network of those, and we can go all the way up to the top of this hierarchy of networks till we get to the two hemispheres of the brain. And we've got basically two fully functioning brains mostly in our head, and yet we see the world not as 100 billion things or 50,000 things or two things. We see it as one thing. It's all brought together, and I think future prediction has kind of it must play a role in that, this kind of network effect where everything can come into consensus. So I see if we can do that on the world, in our society, or in our, bringing everything that we care about into, de-siloing all that data, then I think that brings us together and it makes us a more unified, global civilization.
So what I'm finding fascinating about this, when I listen to you talking there, I just get this little voice in my head that says, yeah, climate crisis, climate crisis, climate crisis. There's so many opposing views, different views, people shouting from the rooftops, people hiding their head in the sand. There's a lot of science behind it. There's a lot of kind of local impact in certain parts of the world, and they're not necessarily the people. They're very rarely the people who are actually creating the problem. So there is this kind of huge global issue going on, and let's just call it sustainability right now rather than climate crisis, because it kind of glamorizes it. But if we call it sustainability, this feels then, if this is a unification predictor of the future, and with all of the science, with all of the academics, with all of the research, with all of the political rhetoric that's going on here, it feels then that Satori could be that binding entity, or that binding place where actually we all come together with all of that data, with all of that science, and then we see how this is going to play out. Because ultimately, if we don't figure this thing out, we're not going to be on this planet to be able to benefit from the things that Satori is predicting for us. So do you see it will be potentially these massive macro issues that Satori is going to do, or is it much more at a kind of a local level, the more sort of like personal stuff? Where do you see this playing out most?
We're focused on the macro scale of things. So Satori has, 3 phases of development planned out. The first one is the public good. Make the public good. Basically, try to focus on this. This is a decentralized project. This is what the decentralized should do. And then, on top of that, we can build kind of smaller local solutions as we go, right? That's phase 2. So we are first and foremost focused on the public good. And I think it's really telling, you kind of mentioned well, first of all, let me just mention, I don't know very much about climate change or any of this kind of stuff. I know that we probably pollute too much and whatever else, but I don't know. I don't know much about it. I don't come down on any kind of side. And the reason is because the data, I haven't looked into the data, but the data will play it out, right? The data is what's true. And what I've found with these language models that have been built, they are approximating language, and they don't approximate truth. So they might approach it in some domains, over time, but the function that they're actually executing is, what answer do I give that doesn't offend people? And the truth often offends people. So they don't approximate truth. You can't get to, we train these models on our language, and then we curate the data. We change our language, and we say, just take this subset, and we then train it again, and we're in the process. Satori has a different philosophy, because it's kind of a different technology. So Satori says, we want to get the human out of the loop of training as much as possible. So it says, instead of training on the human language, now that it needs to have a human interface, so it's going to use large language models to communicate with us. But the core of it doesn't need to be that. And what it needs to do instead is watch the real world. The real world. Just watch the real measurements that we take of sea changes or temperatures or whatever else. Watch the real data and correlate it with the other real data, right? If we're looking at the domains of environment and maybe economy, we'll correlate those two. If we're looking at sentiment on Twitter, correlate it, right? Bring it all under one network, one roof, and correlate it. And the only thing that these Satori nodes do is predict the future. That's all they do. And that's all they care about. They don't care if it offends anybody. They don't care. I mean, it's because they're machines. That's what they do. They predict the future. So they're always trying to get better accuracy at predicting the future. And that is about as close as you can get to truth as I think is possible, right? So these language models, I think they're important, and we treat them, because we don't know any better, we treat them as arbiters of truth. We treat them as oracles, but they're not. And when something like Satori comes along, I hope we realize that is the closer arbiter of truth. And it will tell us exactly what's going to happen. And we don't have to worry about, you know, I hate coming down on sides of things, because I know that I only see a very small portion. And even if I look into it, it's going to take a while to get any kind of confidence that I know what I'm talking about. So I try not to have any opinions, and just let the data speak for itself. And I think that's the same philosophy that we can employ with something like Satori.
To me, this is one of the most profound things I think I've encountered in, well, however long, a long time. When I was looking at Satori, obviously before our conversation, I was thinking, wow, this is interesting. But having just heard about that whole thing of kind of stepping out of the echo chamber that we all live in, we all live in our little bubbles, and it's not a criticism. I do it.
Right.
It doesn't sound like you do it very much, Jordan, but most of us actually do this, and it is, again, it's another one of those facets that makes us human. We like the predictability, we like that almost comfort zone, if you like. And we don't necessarily, I mean, what was it Jack Nicholson said in A Few Good Men? It was like, you can't handle the truth. Was that iconic moment in movie history where he just looked Tom Cruise in the eye and he said, you can't handle the truth. And it is so true, isn't it? That those kinds of things they hurt, they can be very uncomfortable. Oh no, let's step back into my little echo chamber where I get the predictable, safer kind of version of the world. And then that will hopefully play out. The thing that I'm hearing from you here, Jordan, is though, there is a brutal, well, probably multiple brutal truths that Satori is going to be, allowing us to see, and this thing is going to emerge. And it is from those macro things that we can then start to, I guess, really understand what is coming, because there's so much rhetoric. There's so much, as you say, the different sides, and it's very hard to know which side to come down on, because if I come down on side A versus side B, well, actually, is side A the right one? Because I don't know if I can really trust their data. They sound and they're telling a good story. And the large language models, obviously, as you say, they're a great introduction, but it feels like once you've been inducted into that kind of area, then I guess Satori is almost the ultimate goal, isn't it, really, for all of us, whatever discipline, whatever walk of life, whatever country we reside in. It feels like Satori would be that ultimate goal in terms of currently an artificial intelligence. Do you kind of see it that way? It's almost, this is the pinnacle of where we need to get to.
Yeah, I do, but I don't see it as a replacement of everything. It's just a really, really foundational technology that needs to exist, I think. I mean, when I think about, like, everything has its place. When I think about like an infant brain, we get born and we don't know what's going on. Our brain is trying to figure everything out. What it has is a body, right? It doesn't know that it has a body, but all of a sudden it's getting a bunch of data from tactile information and light and audio, and it has no idea. It's just data. It's just a jumble of mess, right? And so the only thing it has to kind of know if it's making a good model of what this data is to see if it can predict it. And so it does that. And I think that's where we're at right now in our society, like in our level of technology too, because we have the internet, and the internet is a bunch of data streams. Information's flowing from here to there, and that's pretty much it, right? So we don't have kind of that the brain yet in our world. What we do have is the body. We have this nervous system that is transferring data around, but it's not being aggregated into a brain that can understand everything in terms of everything else yet. We do that as humans, and we've done it well enough to make a civilization that we can somewhat survive. Like, we probably have a lot of problems with sustainability, but we're good so far. But that's not good enough, right? Because our brains are small and we can only see so many things. And then when we want to communicate with each other, it's very slow and tedious. So it feels kind of like we really need to make a more efficient brain, and the foundation of that is just learn how to predict everything. And then you can build stuff on top of that. Our executive high level function isn't going to do anything if we're still, a 2-month-old and we can't really figure anything out. So you have to have all of this other, you have to have the prediction happening in order to be able to walk across the street safely. So, when I think of like crazy things, like why haven't we heard from aliens or something like that, the Fermi paradox, I always come back to, well, we're ants, like we don't know what's going on at all. And so until we get this kind of infrastructure of a global brain, what do we have? We have nothing, right? So anyway, sorry, that's probably a tangent.
Well, yeah, but it is so interesting because it does open up all of these kind of questions and these considerations. And this is why I'm finding this, such an interesting conversation, because it just stretches everything. I mean, literally everything beyond the kind of paradigms that we've already set for ourselves. And I think, for me, that's why this is, such an intriguing kind of, potential and future. I mean, you've said obviously phase 1 and phase 2 here of Satori. I mean, think forward to kind of say phase 4 or maybe even phase 5, because once this thing is up and running properly and kind of really growing and building and predicting and then seeing, I guess, the reality play out, because that's going to be interesting. Maybe when you get to phase 3 or phase 4, it's going to then be thinking, hold on a minute, I predicted that. Now let's self-correct because something slightly different happened. Or, yeah, I absolutely had that on point, 100% score. Great. Okay, so now I'm learning. When we get to kind of episode 4, episode 5 of this saga, is this going to be too powerful? Are we going to get this thing to become just too capable, I'll use the word again, powerful? Is there a risk and a danger of that?
It depends. I don't think so. Think about, like I mentioned, our neurons in our head, they kind of clump together. And so at the very bottom, they're a neuron, right? But these neurons, maybe 50 of them, maybe 50 to 100 clump together in something called a mini column. So a mini column, very small little group of neurons. This little, and they're arranged like a grid. They're arranged like the whole brain is mini columns, right? The whole neocortex really is what I'm talking about. So they clump together in these little mini columns, and they start to communicate with each other. And they start to send messages, and much of what they're doing is predicting the future. And so what they do with that many neurons, with 50 to 100, they can start to build some pretty complex models. And then those mini columns, they actually clump up into cortical columns. And this is like 50,000 neurons. So it's lots of these little mini columns. Now they're in this network that is one cortical column. And those cortical columns, they kind of talk in aggregate one with another, right? They're a network of cortical columns. So the brain has this kind of structure. Okay. So the reason I'm saying this is they've done all these studies. They had so much data before they even had a good theory of how this stuff worked. They had mountains of data. And so what they know is that these cortical columns and these mini columns even, they try to build a holistic view of the world. And so, for instance, say you have a cortical column or a mini column that is getting very raw data from your index finger or something. It's going to take that data and it's going to reach out and try to talk to its neighbors, maybe its distant neighbors, and try to figure out, in what context should I be interpreting this data that I'm getting from the finger, right? What is going on? What is the context in which I exist right now? And they build a holistic world model, and by doing this, as much as they can, because they're just trying to understand this data. But in order to do that, they need to build a model of everything from their point of view. So I look at the world and I look at humans and I look at our civilization and I see the exact same kind of pattern. And I see that we all have our own particular point of view, our own particular, we'll say, inputs. Maybe we were not listening to an index finger, but we have a particular job and we've been trained at that, and we know that it's our domain. But that job, or that's in an environment, it's in an economic environment, or the way the industry is changing, or whatever else, right? So we do this same kind of thing, and we build these holistic models. So once we're getting out there way 100 years in the future, I don't know what it's going to look like, but I can say that we have a very integrated brain, and I don't think they're all these little tiny models that are very holistic. They don't seem like they're afraid of being part of this massive structure, right? It doesn't seem like that's a bad thing. So I guess I don't know, but I don't think it's going to cause any trouble or any problems. For the long march of history, of technological history, we have been kind of trying to increase the bandwidth between each other, between our minds. We've been trying to increase that bandwidth with every step of communication technology. So, with couriers and horses and letters. Before that, the written word, right? We didn't even have a printing press. So, but then we get to, telegrams and radio and TV and computers and now smartphones, and we're talking about brain to computer interfaces. It seems like this trend of just increasing the bandwidth between each other and between us and the world, us and computers and us and each other, is just a trend that's never going to end. So I would say in 100, 1,000 years, maybe it reaches some kind of plateau where we're comfortable with it being like we need some kind of distance or something. Maybe, but I don't see that trend ever ending. And if it does kind of plateau, I think it'll be by design, like that's what we want. So I don't really see any problem. I don't really see any danger, especially if we can decentralize things as much as possible, get as many viewpoints as possible in charge. I think that's really the answer.
So when we're kind of thinking in that way, and if you're looking 100 years out, 1,000 years out, we're looking for humanity here. I guess Satori will have saved us before that anyway, because it will have predicted that, hey guys, you're taking this down the wrong route. What we're seeing here is something that actually is not going to be favorable to either me as Satori or you as a human. So therefore, let's adjust now. So it kind of, there should be some kind of self-correction, you would have imagined, really,
Yeah.
with the massive amounts of data that will have happened by that point. So this possibly is the savior of the universe. It really is. It's coming through here in the form of Satori, this decentralized entity, let's call it that, because it's feeling like it is, yeah, it's bigger than all of us, but it is all of us. It's so
Right.
exciting.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's important to understand is that at this moment, Satori doesn't have, it doesn't even have language. It doesn't have any concept of a self. It doesn't have any goals. It doesn't have it. It's just a machine that predicts the future on the individual, like, neuron level. Like, so, but actually, if you think of it in the broader spectrum and see its controllers, which is anybody who holds the Satori token, if you see them as part of the machine, because we build machines all the time. Every corporation is a machine, every government's a machine. So if we see the humans taking part in that part of the system as part of the machine, as part of the Satori entity or identity, then I think then you could say that it has its own identity. But what are those people doing? I think it's important that they are, they are guiding Satori according to our human level desires and understanding. So we're able to say, okay, I've got this token. I am going to vote on which data streams in the world matter to me, right? So that's my input. I get to say, look, I don't care about the environment, so I'm gonna, I want to know the sports betting or whatever. Or you could say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to try to use this for economic gain. I just want Satori to understand our environment. Why don't you look at the sea temperatures, right? Let's start there. So I think having a bunch of different viewpoints and allowing people to have that control is the right way to do it. Now, when Satori says something and says, well, this is what's going to happen, if we're offended, there's really nothing that we can do, nothing it can do. It's not going to respond. It's just going to be like, well, this is the future. And sorry, right? You asked for the future of this thing. This is the future of that thing. So I think that's, it just feels like the right solution to me. And it seems like this is a implementation of intelligence, or a major aspect of intelligence in the world today, right? As it grows, you can kind of extrapolate it and say, oh, it'll start to, become its own thing or its own identity eventually. But right now, the humans are its identity, right? We're the only ones making models of what Satori is in our brains, and we modify what it is by our use of the token. So it'll take a long time for it to get any kind of concept of itself, right? And I think that's probably good for now. It's probably not a problem if it ever does, but yeah.
Wow. I want to get you some more token holders, or at least some people who are looking at this and thinking, this is just groundbreaking. This is what I think we've been waiting for, or this is something I just need to understand because it sounds scary. Whatever perspective, if you're listening or watching this and you're thinking, what is Jordan doing? Or you're thinking, wow, what's Jordan doing? Then really, I want to be putting people in your direction. So should they go to satorinet.io? And then what will they experience? What will they see when they get there?
So when they get there, they can see kind of the front page, and the front page will always be kind of your portal into knowing what the future is. So because it's a free and open good, right? What's it called? Yeah, the Satori good is producing these predictions for free. So right now it's kind of a search engine kind of interface. It'll eventually turn into a language where you'll just chat and you'll be able to ask questions about the future. But right now, before we launch, which is in July next month, right now you'll be able to see kind of a place to put in your email to get notified when we launch. And if you want that, you can see that. Other than that, there's other tabs explaining the vision or the roadmap or, what we've got done so far and where we're going. But there's also a download tab where you can just download Satori on your machine. It runs inside of Docker, so it's isolated from the rest of your machine. And you can just download it and start running it right now. So, yeah.
Get involved, people. This is, and I'm so proud that we've managed to have this conversation before the launch, because I just have this feeling. I've seen a lot of technologies come and go over the years. I'm at that kind of age where I've seen cycles, I've seen pre-internet business, blah blah blah. So I've been around a long, long time, and sometimes I just get that extra feeling of like, this is something a bit special. And I'm going to remember this conversation, Jordan. Thank you so much for kind of coming on and having this this chat about this pre-launch, because I know you're super busy, obviously preparing for July and this thing going live. So I want to push as many people as I can in your direction to explore and find out. And the video on the homepage, that first kind of welcoming thing, that really gives you a real clarity of the vision that Jordan has for this this. I'm still going to call it entity. It feels right to call it an entity.
Yeah.
Satori is an entity thing. It is a thing. It's not just this dispersed stuff going on. It feels like it's real.
Actually, that's why I named it Satori, or that's one of the reasons, is because a Satori means that aha moment. Aha, right? I just figured something out, or whatever, enlightenment. And I thought, if anything, we're right at the beginning of this AI, or intelligence in machines journey that we're going to go on. So if any technology maybe has the ability to evolve into a kind of conscious intelligence in machines, it has to predict the future in order to do that. So that's why I named it Satori, because I thought maybe this is the one that will say aha first.
And I'm really hoping it will, because this is for good, people. This isn't to have commercial gain. Jules is not setting this up so you can be the next great founder or startup entrepreneur. This is for the greater good, and to me that is the whole point of why we're doing this stuff. So Jordan Miller, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.